think that God told man exactly what he lived on in the very beginning, and we're in a big game of telephone at this point.
Yeah.
Well, remember, this all started with Ptolemy in Egypt, right? He didn't just change the cosmology, he also changed spirituality, he changed the natural order. We got this alongside a whole host of societal changes, you know? So this was implanted into society. We fully understood the sky, we fully understood the earth, but Ptolemy had other ideas, right? Why? When you look into Ptolemy, you can understand what the revolutionary change that was happening at the time.
Jin, we're getting that echo through your mic again, dude.
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself right now. Go.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say that I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because history is not exactly an exact science, and I like history. I think it's pretty, if we're going with the mainstream, then it was well established that it was a globe from Eratosthenes' time. So the Greeks, they would have, well, it would be said that they knew it was a globe. The first globes that appear in paintings, I think, was about 500 years ago, something like that. So,
Do you believe the Eratosthenes story, though? Because there is no direct evidence he existed. We don't even have first-hand accounts of him doing anything in his own time.
well, college students do that exercise. I'm pretty sure I've watched that before, and they get pretty close to.
And yet today's in-flight telemetry is telling us we're level, but yet they want to use a 2,500 years ago man in a loincloth and battered telling us that this curvature should be measured, but yet we are unable to measure a single degree of curvature with today's modern technology. The technology that they said take you to the moon and put satellites in space, for example, or go to Mars. Yeah? Is that right? Come on.
I guess he was just so far ahead of his time that he had no impact on the Greek cosmology, no impact on society. Nobody wrote about him, and he changed nothing for another 1,000 years. I guess that's just how history works, right? No, that's not how it works. If somebody so revolutionary does something, he's documented, and there's direct changes that happen as a consequence. And it doesn't take 1,000 years. You know how long 100 years is? The impact of information would be a lot greater. There is nothing in his own time. So you've got to ask yourself, who is this Eratosthenes guy? Did he really exist? Or is this just a convenient backstory for a fake fucking globe?
Yeah. Did he get married? Did he have children? What happened to the guy? Was he gay? What happened? You know what I mean, ladies and gentlemen? You know?
Nobody knows.
Pets?
We don't know nothing about him. Nobody wrote about him. He impacted nothing in his time. You look at Greek cosmology, it's flat Earth. It's not a globe.
No, and this, ladies and gentlemen, a flat earther back in 2019, 2020 even, asked ChatGPT, who was the first person to talk about Aristotle. And then ChatGPT came out with Aristotle and another Greek prior to Aristotle. So how could these two people speak of somebody that hadn't been born yet? 100 years before them. See how strange that was? ChatGPT giving you out wrong information. Simple question.
There's a whole host.
Show you that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just add. There's a whole host of so-called Greek philosophers and impactful Greek people who there's no direct evidence that they even existed. It's just Neoplatonism or neo information, which means in the Enlightenment period they rediscovered it. The question is, before the Enlightenment period, did these people even exist? Not in the literature, not in the history books, and not in the records. So I would say there's a lot of Greeks that need to be questioned in their authenticity. Did they exist? And Aristophanes is definitely one, because of the high-level information that he provided had zero impact in the world. What, was he just so ahead of his time that nobody else could understand what he said? Of course not. It's a lie.
So when do you propose that the globe was actually proposed then?
Ptolemy the First. After Greece invaded Egypt, they revolutionized religion. They created the new modern religions, but they also changed the cosmology and they changed society in general. And this was over Ptolemy the First and Ptolemy the Second. Basically changed absolutely every foundational piece of information we know about history and the world. And I think this is where the globe began in geocentrism, with Ptolemy the First. Before then, there was no globe.
And what evidence do we have that Ptolemy existed?
Well, we have lots of direct evidence that Ptolemy existed. He's literally in the Egyptian records. And you have the Greco-Roman, the Egyptian Greco period, which is all 100% documented. Yes, there might be questions around how long ago, and we can argue about whether it was really 1,000 years ago, but we know that he existed, and we know that he came after Alexander the Great, and that these people existed. But the mythological people beforehand, like your Aristotle, your Plato, your Aristophanes, there's no evidence for these people. We're talking about 1,000 years before this so-called time. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying, you know, just cherry pick the history, but I'm saying we do have primary source information around the Ptolemies and their dynasty or whatever. You know, that was a whole period. Him and his sons had a few hundred years. And in that time, they brought us the globe, spherical geometry. They brought us the first Bible. You know, they brought us so many changes to society. You see it in tandem with all the other changes, and you ask yourself, why were they changing so much? Why did they need to change everything? How is it that this
Oh,
one
yeah.
king is a genius in scripture, genius in history, genius in spirituality, genius in geometry, genius in astrotheology? Like, come on, guys, this guy was a reset puppet. Sorry, I'm ranting, but I hope you get my point.
Oh yeah, very interesting conclusion. This is the Ptolemy here, the 100 to 170 CE around. Is that right? Claudius Ptolemaeus, Greco-Roman astronomer.
Ptolemy Soter would be the first Ptolemy, and then the other Ptolemies are his sons. So it wasn't Ptolemy Soter who created the globe. Ptolemy Soter created the Septuagint Bible and changed religion and introduced some information, some cosmology to, but wasn't released. It was his son, I believe, who released the first geocentric model. I might be wrong. It might be the other way around. It might be the Septuagint was his son and he was the geocentric model. But either way, it was him and his son who gave us the first Bible and gave us the first geocentric model. And these were warlords.
You're saying it's not the Tanakh. You're saying the Tanakh never existed. The Jewish scriptures never existed. The first form of scriptures were the Septuagint.
Well, I mean, I don't want to start that debate, but I'm going fully based on the direct evidence. So we don't have, you know, when it comes to the Torah, we didn't have a Torah when the Septuagint was first created. Yes, that's right. But I don't want to get into that debate. I'm just saying the Torah didn't exist at this point. This was the first unified, I suppose, Christian/Jewish book in circulation. It was a Greek book.
Does it have to be in circulation to exist?
Yeah, that's why I'm not talking about whether it existed, and I'm not trying to get into that debate. I'm trying to say, in terms of impacting the world and changing the world, yeah, the Septuagint was the first mention of the first 4 books of the Old Testament were released in the Septuagint. Yeah, I would argue before then, if you know the story of Ptolemy, these were in scrolls that were removed from temples before they housed them in the Museum, which was the predecessor to the Library of Alexandria. Before that, all of the information was in temples scattered across Egypt. That's what the primary source information tells you when you look at how they got all this information and how they came up with the 72 Septuagint, the XXL or whatever it's called. That was just after all the scrolls were removed from the temples of Egypt. But that's not my point. The point is they changed everything. They changed everything, and they I don't know where Aristophanes first came up. I don't know if it was Ptolemy, if he even spoke about him, but there was no Aristophanes at this point in history. You know, he wasn't taken into account.
Never heard of him through my school history. It's only when I became a flat earther that the name came up, and someone offered it up as they put him in there because flat earth came about and they had to, you know, try and prove the curvature somehow. So they inserted this character into the history books. None of his peers spoke up. Nobody knows if this guy, like you said, no one spoke of him as anybody with his friends and whatever his life. Nothing.
Yep.
Just that he'd done the curvature thing.
It's the same.
Well, I'm a lot younger.
Yeah, sorry.
I learned about Eratosthenes in high school, so I don't think it was like a flat Earth thing or something. And then in college, I learned about these guys, Ptolemy and stuff, but I guess I didn't retain a lot.
Well, the info I told you is not what you learn in school. You literally have to go and follow up with these archaeologists and historians who specialize in Egypt, especially Alexandria, because Alexandria is where all this happened. And the beginning and the start of Alexandria comes along with the story of Ptolemy. And it's also just after it's also just after the fall of Egypt, where you know, Alexander the Great, that story, and all of a sudden they're making everybody in Egypt speak Greek. So these books couldn't even be read by the native speakers. You know, we're told that Egypt had the first this and had the first that. They couldn't even read it. It was in Greek. So when you understand the context of what was going on, you can see there was a complete takeover, not just of the society and the, you know, the hijacking of the way they do things, but also they changed the deities, they changed the gods, and they changed the cosmology. And when it comes to ancient Greeks, I mean, there was no Plato until Plotinus, the Neoplatonic, the person who reintroduced Plato's work. His name's literally Plotinus, and he had a teacher who basically sounds like, not Socrates, because that was his son, but his student. But is it Aristotle? Aristotle was his teacher. You know, Plotinus had a teacher who fit the description of Aristotle, and Plotinus's life fits the description of Plato, and he was the person who reintroduced Neoplatonism. But we're talking about 1,000 years of forgotten Platonism. I mean, Platonic form, these are the bases of people would argue is the basis of modern thought that the Christians embrace as well. I mean, it doesn't make sense. These ideas were not lost.
Well, that's strange because Irenaeus and there's another one. I've been reading the Ante-Nicene Church Fathers, so they're before the Nicene Creed. And they rebuke all of the guys you just mentioned and showed how they're just puffed up with knowledge that isn't any kind of real true knowledge. So the Church Fathers spoke out against these people.
I probably I'd agree with you. It depends on the context, because if you go into modern sort of information about Platonic form, they'll tell you it was married with the church and early Christian thought. But I disagree. Yeah, I agree with you. I believe that this is something that came in afterwards, Platonic form, and we're just told that this is old, from ancient Greece, and it was just forgotten. No, I would say that these things were understood, but in different ways, and it was different ways of thinking about it. But I think they changed it because they had to fit it into the context of which they wanted to represent this information in a new format, i.e. the Septuagint Bible. And I think that's why you had such problems in Egypt at the time. And that's why so many people left. And you end up getting your first Arabs going east. And this is stuff you can double check. You can double check all this. This is not mainstream in your textbook, but if you go into the actual Egyptologists who study Alexandria, this is what they're trying to say. They changed the world, the Ptolemies, and including the geocentric model. There was no globe before that. The Egyptian cosmology is a flat Earth cosmology with a dome. The Greek cosmology is a flat Earth cosmology with a dome. And that's how it was. And if there was 1,000 years between the Greeks and the Egyptians, and the Greeks and the Egyptians share all this information, share the same gods, basically with different names, share the same information, where did Aristophanes' influence impact the Greeks, impact the Egyptians? He didn't. He's not even written about in his own time. So I'm just saying, just don't believe everything you read in mainstream history.
Yes, good process of deduction there. Thank you very much. Very Sherlock Holmes. Thank you.
Well, you also got to remember the Greeks occupied Egypt.
Exactly. And then once they did, they had a problem because the gods of the temples in which they were worshipping didn't match their description. So there was an actual conversation that happened with the leaders and the priests of the temples and Ptolemy, where Ptolemy said, you need to introduce or put alongside a god that represents us. And the priests said, no. So Ptolemy shut the temples, removed all the scrolls, and put them in a place called the Museum. That's literally the root word for the first museum, the Museum. And the Museum had a little building built on the back of it. Eventually, within, I think his son built that became the Library of Alexandria.
Right, so I mentioned that.
That's how the Library of Alexandria backstory is it's called the Muson on the Bouchon, and it involves the story of them closing the temples because the higher ups in the Greco-Egyptian leadership fell out with the priests. So they changed the religion because the religion was they couldn't have the authority of the people because the priesthood and the gods didn't represent the leaders in Egypt at the time. And that was a problem for the higher ups. It wasn't a problem for the common folk. It was a problem for the higher ups, so that led to the closing of all of the temples. You can Google that, the Ptolemy closing the temples, and you'll catch into this story. Not taught at school, not in a nice documentary.
Oh, you got to be careful with documentaries. There's always bias or corruption within that also. I did see some film or video about Egypt, and the modern so-called Egyptians or Egyptologists from Egypt were trying to claim a genetic connection to ancient Egypt, which is absolutely impossible. And that's why they were trying to make like an inherent right to ancient Egypt artifacts, which is not even believable.
And I don't want to get controversial, but we've touched on it already. I believe this is where you now get the Hebrew term appear all of a sudden. And I think when you look at what the Egyptians were saying about the Israelites, you can see incentive why these people would want to be connected to these people called the Hebrews or the Israelites, and maybe they couldn't be the Israelites, so that's where you get Hebrew. And my argument is, where was the Hebrew text at this time? Where was it all? I would argue there was no Hebrew in that day. There was no such thing as Hebrews or Hebrew language. But that's extremely controversial. But I'm just saying it because of what you've touched on there. I'm saying that's where they tried to link themselves in through Judaism, which didn't exist at the time until Ptolemy.
Yeah, but there's been so many incursions within Egypt. There's no genetic reference to anything because apparently they were ancient, Anglo or white tribes within Egypt. Then something happened there. Then other incursions happened. Then the Greeks moved in, and then they left. Then the Romans moved in, then they left. Then the Islamic people or the Muslims moved in. Then the Mongols moved in, and then this modern mix match.
Yeah, the Muslims never left.
What the hell is this? This is ridiculous.
But you've got to understand all of this came. If you look at the history and you see 1,000 years in between these events, you say that doesn't make sense. But if you start to recognize that this whole Dark Age period doesn't make sense, and there is continuity when you remove some of this time, you can see that this all begins with Alexander the Great, following on with the Ptolemies, the creation of the Septuagint, the creation of the Bull, the creation of the Torah, yeah? And then you get basically the rebellion from the Egyptians who leave, go east, and become the first Arabs. And then you get modern Islam. Before it's called Islam, you get the Moors, you get the reinvasion of Europe, yeah, and then you get eventually the fall, the Battle of Granada, followed by the Battle of Carthage, which led to slavery. And that continuity makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is this 1,000-year period where none of the records are reliable. All of the language and society just stopped dead for 1,000 years. It doesn't make sense. I'm only saying that to try and add context to how what I'm saying could make sense, not because I'm trying to push a narrative, just because that's where the direct primary source information leads you to. There's problems with this calendar that we're on. Yeah, I'm ranting again. I mean, there's evidence that the Russians, Northern Europe, they had all this so-called Islamic signs and symbols all over their money, all over their armor, their swords.
Yes.
These weren't called Muslims.
Yep.
They weren't called Muslims back then. They were Christians.
I did see some 16th or 17th century maps. They had Islamic type people living within their communities.
Yep,
Yeah, but Islamic people also use the Torah though. So it's from my understanding, what I'm gathering from what you're saying is, in order to create a reset, like we can relate it to the fact, like say I came upon New York City, right, and 1,000 years from now, and it's all destroyed and wrecked or whatever, and then so now I write a story like I find a comic book like Spider-Man, or I write a story like Spider-Man, and then we assume Spider-Man is real because the places exist. Like, so since there's the writings on the Egyptians' walls of all the babies being thrown into the Nile, then we just make the story up about how Moses was born at a time that the Egyptians were throwing all the babies in the Nile. Is that Steelman or no?
No, I think it goes more along the lines of these stories already existed and they were in the folklore and they couldn't be removed, like Gilgamesh, like Moses, but they existed with different names in different periods of time, not in the context of one big epic to do with the one true God. It was more to do with these famous stories from different areas and different regions, and that they were all housed into one place for the idea of synchronization, to synchronize and create something that can be worshipped by all. Because the landscape had changed. You now got Greeks running Egypt, and you've got a melting pot of races and beliefs and cultures. So this would be called a unification.
The monotheism, right? Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And so the monotheism unites them all. And what's interesting, though, in the book of Yasher, Moses goes by like 10 different names. So that's like in the biblical story that he had a lot of different names.
Yeah. And I would argue that a lot of what you find in the Septuagint and beyond is found in older texts. Whether it's the Egyptian texts, some of the Sumerian texts, which, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself when you talk about Sumeria. But I'm saying that a lot of these ideas have been reimagined or retold. Not that they didn't happen. It's just they're told in a different context to synchronize and merge everybody and keep everyone together.
Yeah, it's just hard to tell which one came first, though. I mean, that's like totally arbitrary. That's just in my opinion, a biased decision.
Yeah, if I was to sit here and say Gilgamesh came before Noah, then yeah, 100%. But if I was to tell you that the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first account of that, dates before the first account of Noah's account, then I think it's safe to say, if this is in the records, then we've got grounds to claim that this was the predecessor to that.
Well, if it's all passed down orally and there's nothing that you can date, it's going to be difficult.
Which is why I say the Septuagint came before the Torah, because there was no Hebrew texts to be found. What were the 70 scribes copying from exactly? We don't have any of that.
That's a
Evidence.
different story than I've heard, because the story that I heard of the Septuagint was that someone grabbed a bunch of Levites, and then they wanted to make sure the scriptures were accurate, and so they told them just write it from memory, and they all came out with the same exact story, and so they declared it a miracle, and that's why we have the Septuagint.
Yeah, and that's the story. You either believe it or you don't. But remember, I'm only basing this on where's the first account, where's the first written account, where's the first evidence, if it's on a tablet, if it's on papyrus, whatever it is, where was this first officially? Do you know what I mean? And that's where I come to my conclusion.
mind of
And
God.
it could be flawed, Torah, and I'm hopeful that you see that I'm trying to be unbiased here. I'm literally just trying to go with the primary source info and allow that to lead me to the information.
I appreciate that honesty, dude. Honestly, I think that's important to do, and I don't doubt that at all. I think that's where the empiricism argument or the primary source argument of why, I'll bring up where does knowledge come from and all this stuff. I think that's probably where it's rooted deeply in,
Yeah, I mean, the first scientific method, I'm giving it credence to Imhotep, because in Imhotep's writings, it was a medical writing, but he basically wrote a step-by-step process on how to
Are you talking about the
observe.
Scorpion King, bro? Or is that part 2 of Imhotep was in that movie Scorpion King, was he not?
Yeah, it's been Imhotep's like a title, so it's very vague, but there is the famous Imhotep credited for the scientific method was famous Imhotep who
I thought Hermes was okay.
he's got names as well. He's got other names as well, but he basically, in his writings has a step-by-step method on how to observe, manipulate, and test to find the cause of things. And to me, that's the first written account of the closest thing to the scientific method that we have. So I would argue the scientific method, that methodology came from the old world. I'm not going to put it down to Bacon.
I mean, I don't even think we could attribute that to any one single individual. I mean, isn't that just kind of intrinsically inherent within the mind? I mean, to kind of ponder and wonder how things work, and looking for that variable, that little toggle switch that you can kind of wiggle and make sense of things around you. I mean, I think that's just kind of innate within us.
I know this is kind of off topic, but do you actually believe that these modern Egyptian tombs are real?
What do you mean? How do you deny the evidence of it when it's there?
Well, we don't have any evidence.
All the megalithic ancient structure in Egypt, you're saying?
No, I mean,
We don't have evidence that they're tombs.
They say, "Oh, we found a new tomb. Oh, we found this mask." And
Are you talking about the sarcophaguses within the pyramids? Those giant
I can
boxes?
bullshit.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
this
I don't know.
bandages and stuff, and yeah, it just looks very suspect. It's great for tourism, I guess.
Yeah, I
Great for
don't think
missing.
anyone is gonna create, like Jeremy's point that he brings up. Why would your tomb be greater than the house that you reside in while you're living?
Well, we don't know that. That's the point.
But I mean, does that make sense? Like, would you personally make sure that your gravesite or your gravestone or your tomb is going to be more significant than the house that you reside in?
Well, okay. No, I can sort of answer this.
Yeah, they do.
Now, a lot of older people, or some people, they don't like helping people out or seeing people have been advantaged, right? So that's why they give all their inheritance to fucking bullshit charities or to some dog hospital or something. Right?
Well, look at Pope Francis, who just
But
passed
it's the
away.
same
He had
mentality,
a-
right? In ancient times, you just can't electronically transfer your wealth to a bank or something. You got to hold it in gold, silver, or wine or whatever. Yeah. So they just bury that shit. Fuck off.
Kind of getting off topic.
I think that's a really bad argument, honestly, because if I want my legacy remembered afterwards, I would make my gravesite way bigger than my house, because obviously someone else is just going to move into my house.
Well, wouldn't your reputation precede you if you were that significant to be remembered in history? Why would it be the aftermath of your existence? I mean, that makes no sense to me.
Because if they watch people forget, if you are raised right in society and you watch people forget your grandfather, then you're going to obviously know people are going to forget you eventually.
I mean, look at Jesus, for example. We don't remember Jesus because of his tombstone or his, the cave he was buried in. We remember Jesus because of the things he did while he existed.
Well, I think that's also false, because I think people remember Jesus because he was resurrected from the dead.
Right. So his resurrection superseded his death.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which even
yeah,
gives
so-
more weight to the fact of having a huge tomb.
Yeah, King Tut didn't resurrect.
I don't think so. I think his
Would we
cross.
be talking about Jesus if we didn't name the calendar system AD Domini or whatever based on the death of Jesus? So literally every day is a reminder of this guy. What if it was
Yeah.
somebody else who the calendar was based on? Would it be him that we remembered instead?
Maybe the date, but it's not the actual location of his death that's more significant than his death and resurrection. That's my point. Like going back to the pyramids and the sarcophaguses and tombstones. Like for example, you look at Pope Francis. His tombstone, all it read was Pope Francis. You look at all the other popes' tombstones, and it's got all this shit on there. And he had $2.5 million while he was living. I mean, I'm just saying, dude. Like, not everybody is hell bent on having a giant fucking tombstone. And to say that these ancient Egyptians would have taken all this manpower, technology, and innovation and put it into a fucking tombstone instead of something that you could have actually had while you were living, I don't know, man. It just doesn't make sense to me. But that's just me. I guess.
No, I can see your point, but the point is we don't even know they're real. Like
Wait, what's
they
the
show us a
question?
bag of bones wrapped in bandages, and it looks stupid. And these wooden boxes with gold layers on it. I'm like, this is fraud. And like Egyptians are renowned for their corruption and their lies and selling fake products on the street, and you know,
I never heard that before.
yeah. Well, they're
simple
the king of they're deceivers. They've always been thieves and deceivers and criminals. The Egyptians.
But the remembering of Jesus, I don't think has anything to do with the calendar or any of that. This is the goal of all mankind. Mankind longs for an afterlife. And Jesus was the first man that showed that it is possible to live after you die. So eternal
think
life
so.
is like the goal of all people.
We had some significant people that supposedly went to the kingdom without perishing. You got Enoch, and there was another one prior to
Jesus
Jesus.
read Hebrews. Hebrews 9 says Enoch died.
I read that he was ascended on a fiery golden chariots to heaven.
That's Elijah.
Maybe it was Elijah. Okay.
Yeah, Elijah. Yeah, that did. But that's not, he didn't die. Elijah just was ascended into heaven.
Right.
So
That's
that's
what
the difference is Jesus died. He was killed. He gave up his spirit and was buried. And then 3 days later resurrected. And before
Your main
that,
point-
he even
your main point was
resurrected
the
Lazarus.
your main point was the afterlife. And if you can ascend without ever perishing, I mean, that sounds like a better way to make it to the other side, in my
Nobody
opinion.
knows where Elisha went to, though.
Well, what gave him the significance to be able to ascend beside everyone else? You know, why was he so special?
Read the story.
Well,
And
I'm
I don't know if that 100% means that he ascended there forever. What if he was moved to somewhere else, into another
Yeah,
part of the world that no one wrote a story about him or something?
I just go with what the scripture says, man. And to me, it sounds like Elijah had the right path. You know, to be able to
Well, the
ascend
scripture
without
says there's
dying.
only one who has descended and ascended. There's only one.
Yeah, I don't want to descend. I'd rather just ascend. I don't want to go into Sheol. That's, Jesus can handle that. I just want to go take, the one-way trip to heaven without dying, dude. That sounds like the better way to go.
Well, that possibility exists for a lot of people as well. It says they'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye. You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about? Like on the day of the trumpet.
Yeah, during resurrection and stuff. But I mean, somehow this guy was able to do it before all that. I mean, that seems pretty prolific in my mind.
The original hipster.
Yeah.
Elijah, actually, that's like for my wedding and stuff. We had a miracle. I was in Greece. There's a mountain. It's called the prophet Elijah because it's like a straight pointing up mountains, and there was like a star above it that was twinkling super bright red and white and blue and stuff. It looked like it was on fire. So I took my girlfriend over there and we were looking at it and then proposing to her on the mountain underneath the star. And when we got home, we looked back up there. 30 minutes later, it was gone completely. And that same night, the next morning, was the Orthodox celebration day for the prophet Elijah.
Oh,
So
wow.
it led us to our marriage, and it was on a full moon.
Wow, dude. That's pretty cool. If you guys have a kid, are you going to name him Elijah?
Dude, we thought about that recently. We're on our third kid right now next month. So we'll see.
Congratulations. Right on.
Thanks.
Maybe just call him Eli backwards. I don't know. Anyways. I don't know.
Yale?
No, I think that would be Eli. But Roots had some pretty interesting stuff with the Septuagint and the Torah. I didn't really hear why he thought the Septuagint came first, but that was really interesting.
Well, I think the Elijah story too, I would read it over again to make sure you're confident in the fact you think he was brought into the kingdom. Because you have to understand what heaven is. And then a lot of the men were saying that maybe he was just taken up and put on one of the mountains or something. So, and then there's the idea of Mount Olympus, and there's all kinds of ideas of mountains in the sky as well. So,
Well, I listen to what Jesus said, and he says that heaven isn't beyond you, it's before you.
yeah, that's because he was right there with them. And when you are in the presence of Jesus, my brother, you're in heaven, bro.
Well, this was when he was going to leave, right? This was prior to him knowing that he was going to be crucified and all this stuff, and he was giving a message to them that, you know, he's going to be going away, and they were like freaking out. And
Yeah, what
they
did
were
he tell
asking
him? He
about,
had to go. Why? He had to
they
go
were,
so he could send the helper, right?
I don't know. I mean, maybe you know better than me, but I'm just giving you what I recall and why I said that. But
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, I believe if Jesus is in your midst, then yeah, heaven is in your midst. And if he's telling you he has to go to send a helper, and then 40 days or 50 days after his resurrection, tongues of fire come out of heaven and rest upon all these people, and now they have the ability to speak any language and do all kinds of, ways to prophesy and whatnot. Yeah, definitely, I can understand why he had to leave.
well, I kind of perceive it that Jesus is everywhere. Like, yeah, I mean, when he was here physically, sure, but he's actually everywhere, like simultaneously. That's why when he says, like, when you turn over a rock, I'm there. When you know, you basically remove a piece of bark from the tree, I'm there. Like, he's everywhere.
Yeah, what chapter and verse?
That seems more a reference to sort of a divine presence, doesn't it? Seems
Yep.
like obvious pointer. Well, I was
Yep.
going to say to Roots, if he's still here, I don't know if he is. I was listening because I listened to Adam Green's show quite a bit, and he always has that. Well, not always, but he has that guy on called Gnostic Informant or something like that. And he seems really well knowledgeable about that kind of thing. And I've heard him saying the similar thing to what Roots was saying about the Torah didn't appear until this certain date, and I'm thinking, well, didn't it go back to like Africa or something? I don't know. Wasn't there like a Cameroon Bible or something that was really old or something like
Ethiopian.
that?
Yeah, Ethiopian.
Ethiopian is it?
And
Right,
you know,
yeah.
Ethiopian, they have an Orthodox church still. Their oldest church is Orthodox. But the thing that I learned about why the Septuagint predates the Hebrews, the way that the translations, the path that the translations were, in Greek, it's more poetic and like it's got more detailed, descriptive, like more meaning, and then it's more bland and plain when you translate down. When you translate down again into English later. I mean, that's
Hey,
one way.
I'll tell you another thing suspect with the translation. The translation from the 70 is the equivalence of being a Greek and then learning Hebrew to being a native speaking Hebrew. Their translation was that of someone who learned the language as a second language. It wasn't a native translation, if you know what I mean. So this was a bunch of Greeks it seems like this was a bunch of Greeks who learned Hebrew or whatever. It had a lot of Greek uses of language that doesn't make sense with the original Hebrew, if that makes sense.
From my understanding, most people didn't read or write back then. A lot of people were illiterate, and so then you have Babel occur, and then the languages are all changed up at that point, right? And then the Hebrew language is reserved for like the priests. And by the time you're talking about, the priests are so usurped. You've got John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness, bro. Like, so to me, I can understand why the Hebrew was lost for sure.
Yeah,
I don't know if we want to stay on this topic.
People asked a couple of times why I believe the Septuagint was before the Torah was because, well, the first the first Septuagint was in the 2nd century BC, but then the first Torah was in the 5th century, I believe. So, 5th or 6th century for the Torah, and then you've got 2nd or 3rd century for the Septuagint. So that's the first official, complete book. The Septuagint came first.
Yeah,
Obviously,
I
that's
can
our
agree
old
with
friend
that.
Ptolemy.
In circulation, I can agree with that. Yeah.
My suspicions on Ptolemy, how he was the first for everything, the first geocentric model, the first. I can't remember the list, but there's a lot of other firsts that he created for us as well. But it's kind of wild, right? Saying that 72 people divinely translated one of the most complex, longest sacred texts exactly the same. You know what I mean? Like that's a wild claim, in my opinion.
A claim of divine intervention, essentially, right?
Yeah.
What about the Gigius Codex or Codex Gigius? You ever heard of that one?
No, not heard of that.
Has anyone else ever heard of that?
Yeah, the Devil Bible.
The Devil's Book.
Yep.
Yeah, it's this giant freaking monstrosity of a book, and legend has it that one single individual wrote it, and you know, there's been people that have looked over it to try to see if there's any discrepancies within the writing, you know, depicting more than one author, and it's shown to be all the same individual. And I forgot how long it would have taken for one individual to write it, but it would have amounted to like decades without stopping. And supposedly this guy was in prison when he wrote the book, and he made a deal with the devil that he would write the book. And yeah, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. That's all I remember about that.
Just want to bring up that point to you, Dyslo. Like I do believe the Hebrews already believed in resurrection from the dead, but I believe that Jesus was the first example of that, of the literal resurrection from the dead. So yeah, I'm sure they also believed you could just be taken up into heaven. You're found righteous. That's cool too. But you know, you have a lot of people in your family that already died, so you know that they weren't immediately taken up. So you would want to reconcile that somehow. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, the
Sure.
resurrection is one of the most crucial points in Christianity, and in fact, it specifically states in the Bible that if the future resurrection to come doesn't happen, then all of our worship was in vain. So it's like
Correct.
one of the it's like one of the most what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it's one of the most important things to come for Christianity that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, not
And
only that, even if you could debunk the resurrection of Christ, I would even take it to that point. That if you could debunk Christ's resurrection, then everything is in vain as well.
sure, yeah. Good luck with that, though. I mean, we got the Shroud of Turin. I mean, we got ample evidence. Got the witnesses. I mean, I don't know.
So we got the Shroud of Turin. Wasn't Jesus a carpenter? Do we have any of his works?
No, he
Anything
wasn't a
built or
carpenter.
anything?
Yeah, that's a misnomer. He was actually a mason.
Well, yeah, anything he built?
Think about it, dude. The reason they call him that is he's the creator of the heavens and the earth, bro. So like, yeah, he's the ultimate builder, dude. So yeah, like if you're looking for like a table that Jesus made, because the claim would be every table is a table that Jesus made, bro.
I was just going to ask you, Tora, do you think it's a coincidence that he died at 33?
I don't know if that's exact on the age or anything. I don't take a lot of numbers from the scripture as perfect, but yeah, it is interesting. And I do in my own life, my from 30 to 33 was a big. That's when I got into all this. I turned 29 and 30, and that's when I came to all of this that I believe now. In between 30
Right.
and 32, I'm
not
35. Just
official
turned
then?
35 yesterday, so I don't know.
This is why we
Oh,
need
happy
Morpheus.
belated birthday.
This is why we need somebody who really knows the stuff, because I heard that the other day. Somebody said 33, and I was like, oh, really? Right. Is that not official? Is that more speculation than no?
I think they say that they say it's official at that, but like I said, like if you go to the like Roots brought up the Septuagint, right? If you read the Septuagint story of Noah and you read the Masoretic or the regular Bible that we have story of Noah, the time in the ark is different, the age of the people is different. So that's why when it comes to numbers, I don't even know if they had the number 0. You know what I mean? So it gets a little confusing to me.
Yeah, I always think every time they mention a number, it's not a coincidence. Like it has some kind of significant outside of what we think it means.
Like the number 666 is not found in the Bible anywhere, in the Greek or anywhere. So that passage in Revelation is actually just a word, or certain symbols in the Greek, and they are considered to be the gematria of them to be 666. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I always struggle with that word too. That's why I just usually say numerology, just to get around.
yeah, right. Yeah, true.
I always think it's interesting how supposedly Jesus disappeared for like, I don't know, about a decade or so. Do you know anything about that, Tora?
Like his childhood.
No,
Or
I think this was more in his 20s. He wandered off and disappeared for a long portion of time. I've heard people speculate that he went to he went to the Far East, like Asia, India, Asia.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I know what you're talking about that because they do have like Chinese records of Jesus and whatnot.
oh yeah, yeah. The Chinese were meticulous record keepers. Probably some of the oldest records we have come from some of these Chinese empires. But yeah, they definitely documented his existence. But I mean, I don't know if that would necessarily be on par with the evidence because I think they definitely had trade routes, didn't they? I mean, I know the Silk Road was probably a ways after that, but I think they still had dialogue with a lot of the other worlds. But I don't know. I think there's some evidence, more evidence. I don't know off the top of my head that he actually traveled over there and was teaching some stuff over there.
You guys ever looked into Judas of Galilee and the similarities between his life and Jesus? Judas of Galilee?
Is that a different Judas?
Yeah, not the Iscariot, right? You're talking about just another gentleman from that same time period.
Yeah,
Because like one of the
exactly
things
same
people,
time period.
yeah, one
Yeah.
of the things people ask about is when Pilate wanted to release one of the prisoners, his name was Barabbas, which means son of the Father. So it's kind of interesting that there are a few characters that people relate to this as well. But I haven't heard of it. Judas of Galilee, huh?
Wasn't that the character in Men in Black? He was like the very first villain in Men in Black 1.
I have no idea, but in history, this guy was known as Judas the Galilean, and he led a rebellion against the Romans, basically. But he also was crucified as well. He was a leader, and I just see similarities between his life. Obviously, I've watched documentaries and
He
come
was a
across
warmonger. I mean, he
people.
was a murderer. Was he not?
Judas of Galilee.
No, Barabbas.
He was like he was like a stealer or like a thief or something, murderer
I think
probably.
he
But
was a
this
warmonger.
Judas,
Yeah.
this Judas of Galilee says the first sentence says he led a resistance to the census imposed for Roman tax purposes. Which when Jesus was asked about taxes, he said, "Give the money to Caesar that belongs to Caesar."
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Yep.
Yeah, he led a revolt and ended up being crucified by the Romans.
By the Romans, right? See, Jesus, like I know Jesus was crucified by the Romans, but Pilate said, "I can't find any guilt in this man." And now the Jews were not allowed to perform execution in that day. That was against their law. So they had to like persuade the Romans into that essentially.
So it didn't have to do with where he was residing at the time, rather than the outcome of his death.
Yeah, I think. Well, the Jews said the reason he got they brought him before for blasphemy, for claiming he was the king, for claiming he was God and that he could forgive sins.
King of the Jews.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then once they felt, they were like, well, this is straight blasphemy. No one's allowed to call themselves God or forgive sins. They were like, this is an offense that's punishable by death in our Torah. But right now, because they're under Roman law, they're not allowed to execute judgment according to the Torah. They have to first consult with the Romans.
Huh.
They were like, and that's a weird version of the Jews too, because there's nowhere in the Torah that would allow for you to be usurped, and a
Well, I think
law
it
be
was
put above the Torah. So that's like a whole idea of these are some strange Jews that were even in power in the first place. You know what I mean?
Wasn't it normally like X amount of lashings or something?
40 minus 1. He got that too. Yeah.
Yeah, he got the beats, bro. It was pretty bad what they did to that guy, for sure. Like the
crazy
worst
part-
monsters today wouldn't even get that sort of punishment.
Yeah, the crazy part is how the story, like, say the Septuagint is written before Christ shows up, right? And you have the Septuagint. So you have Psalms 22, right? And then right before he's about to die, he goes, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He literally points you to Psalms 22. And then you read Psalms 22, and it's literally everything that's happening. They divide my garments and cast lots for me. They will pierce my side. It's insane to me. Like, how could the Septuagint have this story and then all those things play out? Unless it's more like this was just a story that someone just made up. You ever read Psalms 22, Dasha?
Dude, it's been a long time since I read the Bible, bro. I tried rereading the Bible, but I don't think I started at the right page. Like I tried going from the front, reading from the front to the back, and before I know it, dude, I was like sleeping. I got into like was it Genesis, where they start going over all the lineage and the names, and yeah, bro, just burned me out, dude. I think if I'm gonna do it again, like I'll probably start at like the New Testament or something.
I hear you, man. Definitely something that takes discipline.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to fall asleep while reading the Bible, dude. I'll just be honest with you.
No shame there, brother. There's a lot of stuff in there. I get it. But yeah, to me, that's like crazy. Like, how could that be? Why would he point people to that direction? Why would he say that? My God, why have you forsaken me? Unless he was, and he's quoting something that predicted what would happen. Then you go to Isaiah, which is in the Septuagint as well. And it talks about him, like, so it's like, how are all these previous things getting this so accurate if this was written before his time, before he came here?
Did you ever look into the CEO of WikiLeaks? I guess recently he was an atheist, and he's like turned Christian. Trying to remember why it was. I think it had to do with a lot of the I don't know. I can't remember exactly what it was. I'll have to look into it again. But did you ever hear anything about that?
Vaguely, but nothing that I have any specifics on.
Yeah, check it out. Look into it. I mean, this guy read the Bible like 5 times recently, and mind you, he was an atheist prior to all this. But I think it was like a lot of the information he was coming across against like the anti-Christians and stuff is what actually pushed him into Christianity and becoming a believer in Christ.
Isn't that funny too? Because you kind of get that vibe from anti-flat earthers, like that they make the flat earthers. You know what I mean? It's the ones that persecute it illogically.
Yeah, it's real similar like that. But I just thought it's interesting how like this guy initially like just openly admitted atheist, and then it's like with all the information he's come across against like anti-Christianity has actually pushed him into Christianity. Like, I don't know. That's just interesting to me.
That's actually what happened with my barber, dude. Like 3-4 years ago, he was going on and on and on and on and on. And then he's like, you know what, man? Because of all this glorification of all this demonic and devil shit, that must mean that God is real. And then that's pretty much what started his faith.
Right?
Or
like if you've got people wholeheartedly believing into the opposite of what Jesus is, like, wouldn't that just give more credence and credit to Jesus? It's crazy.
But not only that, why would you believe the Bible in the face of this evil? Well, because of how the Bible describes that it works. And then when you realize it does work like that, what better evidence than to literally see the Bible's messages and details personified right in your life? Like, that's a very convincing set of arguments, right?
So I've been saying that forever. The Book of Mormon's perfect.
I mean, people believe the truth when they recognize it. That's really how it works. Right? When you find no truth in something, then there's nothing there for you. Nothing to latch on, nothing to recognize, nothing to reflect upon. When it's true, you got to be like really obsessed with power or money or something in order to deny recognition that it's true.
Or the implications are tough, Arlen. Like what the implications of it mean.
The same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's the
thing.
biggest doozy right there. I think you hit the nail on the head, in my opinion.
Right? Power, money, what are the consequences? Well, speaking the truth will turn all the power and the money against you, because that's the domain of the beast, as the Bible basically describes.
I think you got a lot of people, Arlen, that are conflicted with things that contradict what the book says. Like you got a lot of homosexuals in the world, and as far as I'm concerned, Christianity isn't really for that. So you got a lot of people that want to live their lifestyle against what the Bible states it should be. So they automatically turn their head to it because it just doesn't fit their needs.
Of course. Right, because the Bible to them is just a culture, and they take out of it whatever they like. They don't actually see it as the truth. They're just using the story format. Yeah? It's like a myth to them, not reality.
Did anybody see that pastor? That American, I think he's gay. I'm
Oh
not sure,
my
but
goodness. I know what you're talking about.
that dude's hilarious.
Yeah, Andrew Wilson went through it with him. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, he got him he said several things that were interested in that. He said exactly what Arwin just said, actually. He said he got him to admit that the Bible's not truth. And he also got him to admit that he agreed with all the tenets of Satanism, which is hilarious.
Did you see Terrence Howard getting exposed for hanging out with Diddy prior to like Diddy's indictment? And I don't know, he was like trying to say Diddy forced me to do things and all sorts of stuff.